guys, welcome back. In today's video I'm going to go through a recent Fox commission. So this was an original design from the commissioner, who then got a digital render of this design from the artist Nuke Rooster. I've never heard of them before, but they did a really good job on the render, and then forwarded it to me, which I then created into a posable doll like you can see here. So stay tuned and I'll go through the rest of the process in this video. So in the previous episode I went through making the tree root legs with Sculpey, so if you haven't seen that, check out the videos I did previously. So I asked the commissioner if she was happy with this particular fox face, and that's what she wanted. So I just cast up a resin piece in my mold that I have created myself. So this is an original sculpture from me, which I molded and then cast in resin. So the eyes were a nice sort of yellowy green. So I originally put some gold in it, but I wasn't really happy with the way the colour turned out, so I ended up wiping it off and adding some yellow instead of the gold, and it came up with this really nice sort of earthy green colour, which I'm much happier with this colour than the first colour that I did. So once that's dry, I'll then go ahead and do what I normally do, which is go around with my black chrome acrylic paint around the eye line, and then the snout and the mouth area. And again, I always prime any surface that I am going to paint, just so the paint has something to stick to, because resin is quite slippery and the paint sometimes comes off very easily, so I always prime my resin before I paint. And I'm gonna do a priming video very soon, so keep an eye out for that. And I usually do about 2 to 3 coats of this black paint, just so there's a nice coverage and it has a bit of strength to it. So once it's dry, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the pupil area. So these eyes are painted, so I've been doing a lot of glass eyes lately, but these ones are painted. And I'm just going in using a pretty dry brush with a little bit of paint on it and just dabbing until I'm happy with the result. Moving on to the legs, and I'm going to be painting them in a tree root sort of colour. So I'm going in with some raw umber, and I'm just loading up the actual sculpt and just painting it with a bigger brush. And I'm just being very careful where I hold and how much pressure I have when I'm holding these particular pieces, because they are Sculpey and they are quite thin, but surprisingly they are pretty durable. I knocked them around a bit and nothing happened, so I'm pretty lucky with that, even though the front claws have some very thin bits on it, but they're pretty good. So I applied 3 coats of paint, of that brown paint, because it's a little bit transparent to that Sculpey piece, and then I'm going to go in with some burnt sienna and just add some details to it, just so there's the tree trunks aren't always one colour, so there's a little bit of variation in the browns, so just adding a few different browns to the paint job will give you a bit more character. And I also wanted to keep some of that white showing through and having some of that brush stroke effect on the tree trunk as well, because I found that looked quite woody, so yeah, I left a little bit there. Moving on to the fur, so I'm going to be using this Mongolian faux fur, and it is a nice green colour, and it's pretty much exactly the same colour as the reference photo that I had, and the same sort of texture. So I'm pretty lucky I had this in stock. And the body for this doll was a little bit different, so I modified one of my fox patterns, and just to account for the tree root legs, and it had quite a thin hind area, so I just modded my pattern that I already have, so it was more like the reference photo. So as you can see here, there's only the 2 green parts, which are both sides of the bodies, and then underneath the belly area. And I'm cutting these out using a small pair of sharp scissors. I find that way better to control where I cut. So the other fur that I'm using is the same Mongolian faux fur, but this time it is in a white, and this will be around the neck area and the chest area. So it was pretty much exactly the same as the reference photo as well. So again, I'm really lucky. And you can see how I've drawn out the neck area pattern. So there's 3 sides, obviously the 2 sides and the underbelly. And then lastly, I'm using this shorter, different styled fur in a lighter green. And again, this was very, very similar to the reference photo in color and texture. So luckily I only had the very last of this fur was just enough for the tail areas. So this one has 10 tails, so quite a lot, but and I needed to make them really, really thin so they would actually fit on the doll and it would look to scale. So once everything's cut, I'll then go ahead and sew it up on the sewing machine with the fur side together, and that way I find it a lot stronger than hand sewing everything, and it's a lot faster. So I can go ahead and flip it the right way around using that back end that is open. So sometimes this can be an internal struggle, but once you do it a couple of times, you'll get used to the best ways to flip things around. So here we have flipped around, and you can see how I have modified that fox pattern. So it accounts for the 4 legs that fit into the little tiny stumps that you can see there. And this will I'll need to do a bit of trimming to it to actually give it some shape, and I'll have to tame that mane as well. So then I'm going to go ahead and make the wire armature, and I have a tutorial I'm working on at the moment. It will be a paid tutorial about wire armature making, so I'll let everyone know when it is available in my shop. So once the armature is made, I'm going to go ahead and sew up using a ladder stitch, and it's just basically really easy. It's going back and forth. Again, I'm working on another video. I'm pretty strapped for time at the moment, so just bear with me until I get some time out of nowhere. So luckily this is only a small section that needs to be sewn up, and then I'll attach it with some fabric glue. So I really hate hand sewing, go figure. But yeah, this doll was really cool because it was only a short amount of sewing. So the tacky fabric glue that I'm using is available in a local craft store in Australia called Spotlight, but I'm sure you can find it in any local craft store. It's just fabric glue, you can find it everywhere. And I'm just putting the right amount of glue in there just so it adheres. So sometimes if you put too little glue, the fabric will absorb it and it won't stick properly. And if you put too much, it will just run everywhere. So you'll get used to how much glue you need to put down once you've made a couple of dolls yourself. And then I usually leave it to dry for a couple of hours for it to actually stick properly. Best overnight. So moving on to the 10 tails, and this was a pretty complex task, and it involved some sewing and gluing because the things are so thin, it required some gluing. So I sort of done it one by one, each tail, which kind of took probably a day's worth of work to attach all of these tails. So you're having to be careful that the tails weren't too back heavy and they would actually look like they meant to be on the fox. So you can see a whole lot of armatures that I have here sticking out the back end of the fox. So I'll go ahead and stick all of those onto the tails. So once I've done that, I'll then go ahead and fur the face and then move on to adding any details. So the reference photo that I got had these little feather-like things at the back of the neck. So I got these little feathers from just a local craft store. I try to find ethically sourced feathers all the time, which sometimes is very difficult to find. So I'm going ahead and just placing these feathers on the back of the neck using that same tacky fabric glue, and I'm sort of just working it into the backing of the actual fur fabric itself, because this particular faux fur has like large holes, if that makes sense, which you can push things into that will stick properly, so they're not just hanging off fur and stuff like that. I forgot to mention I added antlers to the top of the head as well, and I didn't film that because it was a kind of difficult process and antlers are quite large. So as you can see here, I just used some sort of fake branches that have a wire in it, and that worked really, really well. And I also added some more feather details around the side of the neck. So this one was a commission, so it's not for sale. I do have a couple more dolls in my shop that are looking for homes as well, which is on my website. And that is all from me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. If you have any video requests, you can leave in the comments down below. You can also check me out on Instagram and Facebook at Creatures of Nat, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!